Hi, everyone. I am Heather, and welcome to another Homeschool Live presented by the Old Schoolhouse. Today, I will be interviewing Kelsey Reed of God's World News. I am really looking forward to learning more about this resource for homeschoolers. Be sure to stick around for the entire interview if you are concerned about teaching your students about current events in today's day and age. And if you happen to know anyone brand new to homeschooling or just anyone looking for resources, go ahead and share this video with them so they can hop on, they can ask questions, and I would love for you to ask any questions throughout the interview, and we will be sure to get to them by the end.
Mm.
And now I am really looking forward to introducing you today to Kelsey. In addition to her role as news coach with God's World News, she is a parent, teacher, wife, writer, apologist, public speaker, and seminarian. She's a world traveler, and most importantly, she is a follower of Christ. God's World News helps young learners to live out the gospel in all areas of life as they become better equipped to engage with, pray for, and serve others with confidence and hope. So, with that end in mind, her goal is to come alongside parents and teachers and other workers who are called to engage with children, which would definitely be the homeschool community. So, I'm so
Yes.
excited. Thank you for joining me today, Kelsey.
It's so good to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, as we were talking before this interview, Kelsey and I realized we missed each other at the HEAV
We did.
convention, but I was able to take a peek at her booth and see some of her
Mm.
resources, and what she has is so incredible.
Mm.
Can you please tell our viewers a little bit about God's World News?
Yes. Well, first, I want to talk about the fact that we belong to a greater parent company called World News Group. And often people are more familiar with the materials that we produce for grown-ups or for really 15 years old and up. So World Magazine has been around for going on 40 years now, but God's World News is actually where it all began. Through just the insight of some wise people, they realize that children as young as 3 years old really need to have exposure to what's going on in the world to develop their cultural or their news literacy. And so we have that aim in mind. We are wanting to really continue that tradition, that purpose to equip our youngest children even with news of the world and to frame it through a biblical perspective. So we've gone through a number of different iterations where we've engaged different age levels as we've gotten to the point where we currently are, which we have 3 different magazines for 3 different age levels. And so we still strive to serve the youngest. For 3 to 6-year-olds, we have God's Big World, which is our magazine that is extremely visually engaging and has early literacy practices in it where it's not only aimed at those who are just beginning to read, but has material for parents to read alongside. So it's a very relational, tangible, and beautiful magazine that I have enjoyed with my youngest, who just turned 7. Well, she has just moved into the next age up, which is challenging her a little bit more in terms of that reading level, as it's really aimed for 7 to about 10 years old, and that's called World Kids. And in it, we dive a little more deeply into similar stories that we cover in our younger level, but we give it a little bit more depth, and we start striving for a little more challenging vocabulary. And then we have our World Teen, which is aimed really for 11 to 14 years old. So we
Okay.
want to be engaging that level with a little more sense of, how are we thinking about the world? Not just what to think, although we give a little bit of the how even in our youngest level, but how do we think about this world in which we live? So presenting wonderful biblical frames even all throughout. So that's what we do.
I love that you clarified the parent company because I remember when I first became a Christian going into
Mm.
a family's house, and right on the table they would have that God's World News, the one for adults. I just
World
remember seeing
Magazine,
World
yes. Yes,
right on the
absolutely.
front and just having the current news. And to me, that was just so incredible seeing it from a Christian perspective. I mean, I was used to growing up just having the normal newspaper come in, or Time and Newsweek coming into the home. So seeing that and just seeing how, once you become a Christian, there's a whole other world out there. You can look at things from a completely different perspective. Just that really spoke to me. So the
Yeah.
fact that you have that for kids is just absolutely incredible because they love to get those things in the mail, right? Kids love
Mm.
to receive these magazines in the mail. And I know I've talked to other homeschool moms and they're nervous. They don't know what there's a lot of popular names out there, a lot of, certain magazines that have been around for many years, but they're not
Mm.
sure about the content, right? So
Sure.
thinking about these options that you have for the different ages, how often, and maybe I'm going ahead of myself, but I'm really curious, how often would a child receive this magazine in the mail? Is it quarterly, monthly?
Yeah, so we release them every 2 months. So we have 6 issues that come out per year. But of course, we have high commitment to that tangible magazine that gets in the mail. It is a part of educational theory and practice to recognize that physical thing is encouraging to your literacy, in ways that really digital information is not quite enough. There's just something special about the written word even in those developmental processes for our eyes
Mm,
and for our brains. So those come out 6 times a month for every level, but we do bridge with digital material, particularly for World Kids and World Teen. So we have daily news that goes out, and we have newsletters that send out that information to a parental email so they can decide when to distribute that to their
wow.
children, their students. So and along with that, not only is there one for the students, but we actually have a parental newsletter as well, where we give some teaching guides and some more of the thoughts that I include that's specific for the parents for encouraging their heart, or
Mm,
for pointing to other resources, or talking about maybe what is the biblical understanding that's so necessary for developing understanding of a certain news event or a cultural trend. So that's some of what
yeah,
we supply digitally.
I feel like that leads beautifully into our next question,
Mm,
which is if you could share with us how God's World News can help homeschooling families. And it
yes.
sounds like parents can absolutely use those resources. So these emails, they're directed for the parents, like you said, correct?
They are, and so when you go to do your subscription, you put in your parental email, and all of the material goes to you unless you change it for example, the dailies. I believe you can get those sent specifically to your student, but parental
Okay.
newsletters, you sign up for those, and you get all that material to be the educator who distributes it at will. So, we're very keen on parental involvement in the educational process. So yes. Let me think. Some of where you go to get that, if you want to go ahead and know that now, our website is gwnews.com, and you can go there for your subscriptions or for some of the extra materials that I write. We have a blog, we have a teacher's lounge with a bunch of other material that's not only aimed for parents, but also for educators. So, and parental educators for sure.
Oh, wow. I mean, that is so incredible. I think there's so many different methods of homeschooling. There's so many different ways to go about it. I know that some families, with multiple children, they might have like a certain time of the day where they have everybody together and other times where, they'll let the other ones go off and do their school on their own. This seems like it could work for both methods. If
That's
you
right.
have, a time, couch time, table time, whatever you call it, morning basket, um, you could have these resources available and you can go through it together. So you were saying that you would have themes and it would be similar across all 3 magazines, so that's something that you could do together, correct?
Yes, we often have the same story covered in each of the different levels. Now, that's not always the case because we cover more material with teen than we do
Mhm.
with the younger 2 levels. And we go more in depth, of course, as we go into the older levels. But generally speaking, you can sit down and have some quiet reading and then do the beautiful work of discussion. You can
Right.
have that conversation fueled by complementary material. So you get that excellent part where you're working what you just learned.
I love that.
Mm.
I would love if you could share an example, maybe from a recent edition where just a current news event that is just an example so we can know like what we could expect.
Sure. Well, I think it's important to recognize maybe back up for a second to say we cover everything we possibly can. Obviously, we have those 6 issues that go out, so we're going to be covering things that go on in the news that are driven by the news cycle, but that are not as proximate. So it gives us a chance to develop a story really well. We're
Mm,
doing that long journalism, writing something that has the best benefit of really reflection. So there's a fullness to the way that we approach a story. Obviously, the dailies we approach with a similar intentionality, but we're going to be trying to hit those timely news. Uh, Stories that are what's going on currently in the news cycle. So when I think of an example right now, I'm actually going to not dip from our features and from the things that we have in our periodicals, but talk about the dailies.
mm,
So we will release a story. For example, recently we talked about, and this has been, I'm referring back to something that happened several weeks ago, the migrant crisis.
mm,
We'll cover something that happened in the news where we observed what happened with the deaths of the folks that were in the truck that had come across the border and were in a very unsafe circumstance, and just we report carefully and diligently on that. um, and yes, so then we'll be telling the bad news that comes up on a daily basis. But the beauty
right.
of what we do is we're really wanting to also highlight the stories where we see man doing as man should, creating culture, doing that which the Lord intended for us before our rebellion against his design. So we're covering the beautiful stories where we see man or we see creature. Just what is going on with the creatures in the Lord's creation? How is man engaging responsibly with the world? What is he creating? What is the innovation? So we will cover those both as features, but even on a daily basis. So the good along with the broken.
Wow. So I love that. So you present it to the children. This is what's happening, but this is how we can interpret it, and this is how we can view it,
Yes.
rather than being told, just to focus on the negative.
Yes. And of course, not protecting our children from the bad news, but not just
Right.
camping out there.
Right. That's really good. And
Mm.
I would love to know how you obtain the information. Do you have journalists at the border, or do you have contacts there that you can talk to?
So
Or is Yeah, go ahead.
our enterprise covers, I mean, we're globally positioned so that we
Mm,
can, yes, either travel to the scene if we're in that region. I mean, it is amazing how well resourced our news is. Of course, we have to dive into other resources too, but we practice sound journalism, which seeks as much as anything to be on the street and to engage the story
mm,
there. Now, of course, I'm not a journalist. So when I speak to that, it's as much as a receiving of the good storytelling and being in
mm,
awe of watching how my brothers and sisters work here. But that's not my primary focus. So speaking to
right.
that is a little bit outside of my scope as educator and resource. So, yeah.
Well, I
But
love that though. I mean, it's a team effort. It's not
yes,
a one-man show,
yes.
and that's what needs to happen, in order to adequately share this with, the Christian community.
Absolutely. There's a
Absolutely.
commitment to telling truth and to engaging with the truth. So I get to have the best benefit of enjoying those practices of sound journalism so that I can also engage with real confidence that the material that I've got my hands on is the best product. And I can stand on it as we talk then further about discipleship issues. So yes.
I would love if you could share an example of how you would take the Bible
Mm.
and incorporate that into a current news event. I'm assuming you use the Bible to tie in to what is happening in the world.
Yes, I really seek to have what, I'm sure is not a completely unfamiliar idea, but a biblical theology. So, while we will try to put very uniquely framed or, excuse me, uniquely fitting verses with our stories, in terms of my own approach, I'm not doing what you might call proof texting, just pulling something out of one
Yeah.
verse in order to try
Right.
to apply it. So I'm looking at it through a large biblical frame to understand how are we engaging just the concept of, for example, let's go back to the migrant crisis. How do we engage the thought of what our calling is as Christians, as believers in the world, when we have such a just grievous situation where people are wanting to get into our country? How do we deal with all of the manifold categories that come up in that story alone? So, again, you and I spoke of the fact that I have 3 children, and, 2 of them are teens, and then one of them is straggling along behind in her elementary years. So, when that story came up and we approached that conversation, I really wanted, in terms of that discipleship, practice, I wanted to be able to affirm the grief of the story. So that's a very biblical concept to recognize, what does
Right.
it look like to mourn
Mhm.
with those who mourn? What does it mean
Right.
to be broken over the brokenness of
Yeah.
world, and to grieve it and to have an appropriate emotional response reflective, honestly, of the Lord's obvious character and nature, where he also weeps over death, and we see that in the person of Jesus. So touch points, um, we obviously see that there's some New Testament in play there, there's some Old Testament in play there. When we think about Ecclesiastes is where we get that weep with those who weep, mourn with those who mourn, rejoice with those who rejoice. Um, and then we see Jesus' response to Lazarus. So we're talking about a story that includes death. A believer's response is to grieve. And then similarly, we're trying to think of what do we think about being a nation that has a posture towards, what the biblical term might be sojourner. We use, of
Mhm.
course, in politics, we're using the term, or just in culture, we use the term migrant, or immigrant, rather. In this case, it's an immigrant. What is our posture to be towards the stranger and the alien? And so there's also that stoking of compassion in the emotional realm. We're talking again about, so how do I engage with my children to stoke their compassion, not just to grieve, but in terms of their engagement. If they are going to see somebody in our little rural area where I live, it's rural Western North Carolina. We have a number of migrant workers there. What does it look like for them to be trained with compassion and to
Mhm.
see the person across from them as an image bearer, not as an invader? So there's some of that we need to think about on the emotional realm, even while building maybe cognitive categories. And so asking some questions that relate to, in terms of what it means to be a sovereign nation, let's think about, what does it look like for us to be hosts in our own home? What are the
Mhm.
things that your dad and I are trying to practice in terms of hospitality? And
Wow.
what does that look like? And so giving them a chance to kind of describe what they've seen practiced. Um,
Right.
so we're building not only emotional categories, we're building some cognitive categories, and of course, using that wonderful, most excellent of tools, the question, to help draw
Mhm.
out their learning and their just their observations, and then also their analysis. So I've talked a lot about that. I could talk about that for a long time. I love the story and the conversation. So,
Right.
mm,
And it's so important what you said. Basically, you don't just cherry pick scriptures that, affirm what you believe, but you look at the scripture as a whole. You look at the situation as a whole and what's going on. Because
right,
when you look at the Bible, it's not always what we want it to say. Obviously, we
right.
have to see what was God saying or what was God doing, and we need to look at everything as a whole and then deal with it like you said. I love how you said you touch on that emotionally. So we're not just letting our kids just walk by and just ignore what's going on. It's being aware. And I think that is so beautiful to
Mm,
teach them to be aware of what's going on instead of just ignoring, you know, the migrant worker that is down the road.
yes.
It's
Yeah.
really beautiful. And I love that you're able to tie this
Mm,
in a biblical way.
mhm.
I'm wondering if you could give um, actually, I'm going to go back to a different question
Sure.
because I think it's really important if we could describe what you think is one of the biggest challenges when teaching current events right now.
Yes. Well, I honestly think that it's twofold. We've talked up to this point about some examples of what it means to try to engage the world. One of the problems can be that we are too much in the world. and that we are so absorptive of the world's categories and definitions and ideologies that we're operating more like we are of the world. Um, on the other hand, I think we can sometimes be too much retreated from the world and too much out of it. Uh, I've heard a quote, "Too heavenly minded to do any earthly good." I don't know if that's a familiar quote, but what does it look like for us to stand as we are called to in both realms? We're called to be not of the world, but still in it, shaping
Right.
it, caring for it, a presence that is salt, a presence that is light. So I think the biggest challenge is helping our children to live in that tension and living in that tension ourselves. And you know what? Tension's not very comfortable.
Right.
It'd be so much easier to just have a neat category that we can just operate in. And that's not what the Lord has called us to or designed us for. His original design for us was to go, fill the earth, subdue it. We broke some of that design, but he restored it and go make disciples of all nations. He's still telling us to go into the world. And so how do we, find that perfect rub between
Mm.
engagement, but also having our head influenced and our heart influenced by the Father's intentions for us?
Wow, that's really good because we could just walk around and just go about our daily business and focus, on what's important to us, or we can allow the Lord to open our eyes to see what is around us and obey his commandments.
Yeah.
Go, we know that scripture is there. What does it look like? And we need to be open to see what God wants us to do and teach our children how to do
And if
that on a daily
and if I can
basis.
be careful, I really as I listen to that and I hear the echo, I wanna be really careful to make sure to frame it in the Lord's provision for us too.
Mm.
The beauty of that second mandate, the discipleship mandate that I shared, I think that one gets really clearly specific that he says he's with us always, even to the end of the age.
Yeah,
He's left us with his spirit. And even if we go back to the creation mandate, we read, God blessed them. And that blessing is something that fills us up and equips us for the work that is ours. We're not
right,
left alone to do it.
right.
And it's not like, hurry up, do this work, just
Yeah,
obey.
right.
And as parents and as educators, that is such a challenge to us as well. How do we give the supply? How do
Yeah,
we equip, provide, not just give these expectations, these benchmarks that we're trying
yeah,
to get
right,
our children to reach, but how do we come alongside of them?
right. It's not a religious commandment, but it
Right.
is, active. He's given us his spirit, like you said. That's the only way it can happen is with his
Yes,
spirit. It's so
yes.
beautiful.
Mm. He's so good.
He is, absolutely. He wants it to happen, so he's going to equip, and I love that.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
So as we talk about current events and news, could you give parents any advice? If you had one piece of advice
Mm.
um, for parents for their students, what would that be?
So it's going to be really partnering with what I just said. Give them Jesus. Remind them of who they are, whose they are. Remind them to whom they belong. Surround them with the gospel. And then
Mm.
also be transparent for your own need for the gospel, for the same equipment. I talk a lot about what does it look like to be a co-learner. Um, Discipleship, what that means is actually the teaching and learning process. The the root word there in Greek, it means learner. Disciple means learner. And so we in our discipleship are also to be learners alongside of our children. We're maybe several steps ahead, but we still are always constantly learning and striving after becoming like Christ. My wonderful managing editor reminded me of Paul's words the other day. Follow me as I follow Christ. That is to be the posture of our hearts, and I think that is most equipping of our students is that modeling out of that posture of the learner, and so it's less to do with what we might tell them as what we
Right.
might model for them. So,
That's beautiful. I love that. And that's the essence of homeschooling
mm,
discipleship, right? And
yes.
so I absolutely, can see how, our followers would absolutely just thrive on these
Mm,
resources because, you are up with the times, you are sensitive to the spirit, you
mm,
are everything that a homeschooling family would just completely gravitate towards. Deborah, she's sharing, follow me as your parent as I follow Christ. So we
mm.
need to be following. And
Yes.
it's such a humbling, a humbling statement, Deb. It's so true. A lot of times my kids will say, okay, you're punishing me. How do
Yeah.
you get punished? And I say, well, the Lord deals with me. Trust me. The Lord deals
Mm,
with me.
mm.
Um, because we need to have that accountability, obviously,
Yes,
with
yes.
others, but ultimately the Lord, we need to be in his word. And
Mm,
like you said, there's resources available for parents too. I know we're focusing on for the children, but you have resources for everybody. We need to always be learning. And so I love that you um, just come alongside and you have resources for the whole family. We're just so grateful for what you're doing for the Christian community,
mm.
homeschoolers, for the world at large, and in a day and age where news can be not so trustworthy.
Yeah.
This is so refreshing to see a
Mm,
resource such as yours. Can you please tell our audience again how they can check out God's World News, how they can get a subscription and obtain your
absolutely.
resources?
Easiest way is to go to our website, gwnews.com, and there you can find more information about how to connect with us, including how to connect with me. My thoughts are shared in the particular portion of our teacher's lounge called the News Coach area. That's my title there at God's World News. So you can also find there my email address at the bottom of every single thing that I write because I love to be in conversation with parents and teachers. What are the things that you're wrestling with as you engage your children, as you engage culture, and just to be able to remind again in those words that are there in my musings, but again today, the Lord has put us in this particular time, just as Esther was put where she was in a hostile environment. Often it was a scary place to be, but she was put there for such a perfect time as that. And we are put here for such a time as this. We are the Lord's gift to the world. And so I want to encourage you in that with the things that I write. We want to come alongside you to equip you and your children to look at this beautiful world with confidence and with hope.
Wow. Well, Kelsey, I think you do just that. Just talking to you, I can't wait to go read your articles and everything you share because I just love hearing from you. It's so encouraging and inspiring. So thank you so much
Thanks for
for
letting
joining
me
me
be here.
today.
It's
And
been a
thanks.
pleasure.
It's been a joy, and I'd love to have you back anytime.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be here.
And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I appreciate you joining us for another Homeschool Live. I just want to let you know if you're new to homeschooling, please go check out tryhomeschooling.com. We have free resources there that you can use. We also have a sale going on at schoolhouseteachers.com. If you want to head over there, this is the last week where you can receive a quarterly membership for a discounted price. If you just want to check it out just for a quarter, just for a few months, then you can just head over there and use the discount code Mama Bear, and you will be able to get a really good deal. You can homeschool for less than $14 a month. So just go check that out, and we would love to see you on the next Homeschool Live. So keep following, and again, head over to www.gwnews.com and get your subscription today because I think you'll absolutely love this resource. Thank you so much. Bye.